Disclaimer: the content presented in this video is purely fictional and intended for entertainment purposes only. Any resemblance to real persons, living or dead, or actual events is purely coincidental. The scenarios depicted do not reflect real-life situations and should not be interpreted as such.
History 1.
Fuck HIPAA. My new patient is my imaginary friend. In February 2001, Grays Harbor County Sheriff deputies responded to a 911 call placed by a 7-year-old boy who reported that his best friend was trying to kill his stepsister. Officers arrived to find a bloodbath. A teenage girl was unresponsive and halfway under the bed. She suffered multiple injuries, her fingers had been broken, her ankle snapped and folded up under calf, and she had 10 puncture wounds approximately 0.5 inches in diameter across her abdomen. According to one deputy, a large bee crawled out of one of these punctures and took flight. As first responders stabilized the girl, one EMT caught a glimpse of eyes glinting under the bed. Upon investigation, the EMT saw nothing except massive claw marks scoring the floor, as well as several deep punctures piercing the floor, punctures that matched the devastating injuries on the girl's abdomen. 2 months later, a second child called EMS to report that her imaginary friend was poking out my brother's eyes. Upon arrival, responders found a teenager boy with a freshly missing eye, broken fingers, and several large, deep puncture wounds throughout the body. 3 weeks after that, a young adult called for an ambulance, claiming that his sister's insane friend was trying to kill him. When responders arrived, no victim was on site. A very hysterical minor in the home claimed that he pulled my brother under the bed. The whereabouts of the youth in question remain unknown. Overall, 8 such calls would be placed between February 2001 and January 2002. During the last of these calls, a police officer discharged his weapon at what he claimed was the perpetrator, a small, deformed youth with massive claws, bulging eyes, and a mouth that fell so wide he could see straight down into its gullet. The suspect was never located, but he left behind a pool of blood on the spot where the officer claimed he fell once shot. When tested, the blood's results were of unknown origin. Not human, not animal, not anything recognizable. The results maintained no matter how many times the sample was tested. This is how this inmate came to agency attention, and what eventually led to his capture. It is important to note that this entity has been utterly uncooperative since capture. Every piece of information that the agency has learned was done so without the inmate's cooperation. Research suggests that this entity has been active for approximately 60 years. Its modus operandi includes targeting a maladjusted child and gaining access to other children via the friendship. The entity is invisible to everyone except its original target until the moment of attack. During the attack, he attempts to drag his target under the closest bed. The entity takes the form of a young boy of approximately 8 to 10 years of age. He has large eyes, an angular face, and exceptionally large hands with long, finger-like appendages that appear somewhat similar to claws. Note that these appendages are powerful and capable of punching through most organic matter with ease. The inmate wears a loose-fitting white blouse with large buttons, as well as a close-fitting hat with a round brim. His mode of dress is what prompted personnel to assign him the name Pierrot. Research suggests this entity takes another form, but to date no agency personnel have observed any form but the one described above. It is important to note that this subject induced severe hysteria in T-Class Agent Rochelle B. Her hysteria was temporarily brought under control by the supportive presence of T-Class Agent Christoph W., but by the end of the interview her distress returned and rendered her incapable of proceeding. Due to the information obtained over the course of this interview, she is scheduled for an urgent debrief with Dr. Wingeride and Commander Raphael W. once she is sufficiently recovered from her episode. Interview subject: Pierrot. Classification string: uncooperative/indestructible/agnosto/constant/critical/theos. Re-evaluation currently underway. Interviewers: Rochelle B. Christoph W. Interview date: December 2, 24. I liked bees because they scared the people who scared me. The people who scared me were the people pretending to be my parents. I lived with them. I don't remember why. I don't even remember my real parents. I just remember living with the people who were pretending. My pretend father was afraid of bees. He was allergic to their venom. He always poisoned the bees and all the other bugs, too. My pretend mother was happy about that because she hated all bugs. Not just bees, I was afraid of bees, too. The people who scared me were scared of them, so I believed that they were very, very scary. But I also liked them. I wanted to be scary like the bees. I wanted to scare the people who scared me, but nothing about me was scary. I was very small and very skinny, and I always cried when I got scared. I was scared all the time because of my pretend parents. I didn't have a name. Well, that isn't true. I had a name, but they never used it, so I forgot. My pretend brother had a name. He had his own bedroom and toys and blankets. I don't remember his name anymore. It's been so long since I used it that I forgot. My pretend parents had lots of rules. I wasn't allowed to eat unless they fed me, and I wasn't allowed to cry if they forgot. If I cried, then I wouldn't get fed for 3 days. They always made me eat off the floor. Sometimes I was so hungry I licked the floor after. I wasn't allowed to leave the house. If I left the house, they would never let me back in, and I would starve to death outside in the cold while they stayed in the warm house with food to eat. That's what they told me, and I believed them. I wasn't allowed to have a bed or even a blanket. That made me sad. My pretend brother had so many blankets, but I wasn't even allowed to have one. Not even the ones he threw away. I wasn't allowed to talk to strangers or even look at them. If I broke that rule, my pretend parents said they would break my fingers and pull my teeth out, but the most important rule, the number one rule, was I always had to do what I was told. I never broke that rule. My pretend parents called me their little puppet because I always did what I was told, even if it was bad. Even if it hurt. And sometimes, doing what I was told hurt. Sometimes they hurt me even if I did what I was told. But they always hurt me when I didn't do what I was told. That's why I always did what I was told, even when it hurt. Even when it made me bleed. I also hoped that doing what I was told would make me a good boy. My pretend parents said my pretend brother got his own room with a bed because he was a good boy. I tried to be a good boy too. I thought that's how I would get my own room, by doing what I was told. I thought that's how my pretend parents would become my real parents, but no matter how many times I did what I was told, no matter how many times I was the best puppet, I didn't get my own room. When I wasn't doing what I was told, I was locked up in the top of the house. It was very hot there, and very dusty. I sweated so much that the dust and sweat made mud on my skin. It was gray, so sometimes I pretended I was a gray mouse eating cheese in the attic. I had never eaten cheese, only seen it. I used to dream about cheese. Sometimes I woke up crying when I had those dreams. There were mice in the attic with me. Most of them were scared of me, but one crawled into my hand. Just like you, Wendy. You crawled right into my hand and held it. Why did you run away? When my pretend parents found out I was friends with the mouse, they put poison up in the attic and put me down in the basement where it was dark and cold. Every time a mouse died from the poison, they brought it down to make me look at it. I always cried no matter which mouse it was, but I cried hardest when they made me look at the mouse that crawled into my hand. I cried so hard that I wasn't even making noise, just wheezes. They left her in the basement with me, so I had to look at her until she turned into a skeleton. One time, after my mouse turned into a skeleton, my pretend parents made me bleed even though I did what I was told. Then they put me back in the basement. I wanted to be far away from the basement door. So I crawled over by the wall. My handprints left smears. That gave me an idea. I put my finger in the blood, and then I put it on the wall. It left a mark, so I started to draw. Drawing on the wall is bad. Drawing with blood is hard. But I drew on the wall with blood because it made me forget I was bleeding, and it made me forget about my mouse. The blood dried up pretty soon, so I had to stop drawing, but that didn't mean I was done drawing for good. I stopped being so sad whenever my pretend parents made me bleed because it meant I would be able to draw later. The more I bled, the more drawing I could do. Sometimes I wanted to draw so much that I didn't do what I was told. Just so they would make me bleed more, I drew a very big picture all over the wall. It was a drawing of a magic city full of giant bees. I drew their stingers really big, as big as swords, so they could stab my enemies. Even though I was afraid of bees, I pretended I lived in the bee city because it was a place my pretend parents would never come to. But then my pretend parents saw the drawing, and they made me hurt. They made me hurt when I did what I was told, so I stopped doing what I was told. They hurt me so bad I started doing what I was told again. They kept hurting me anyway. When they were done, I was so angry and so scared that I smeared all my blood all over the drawing to erase it. I didn't need a city. I needed a door. A way out, so in the corner of the wall, in the only place where I didn't draw the city, I drew a door. A little one, a door that was almost too small even for me so my pretend parents wouldn't be able to fit through it. Then I drew a bloodbed with blood blankets on the floor by the door, and went to sleep. A creaking sound made me wake up. I thought it was my pretend parents coming to make me do what I was told, so I opened my eyes. I saw that the blood door had turned into a real door, and it was open. I couldn't see the room inside it, but I saw light. Golden lights and colorful lights, like afternoons in summer and the Christmas tree I wasn't allowed to touch at the same time. It was so beautiful. Then something huge came crawling by, blocking the light. For a second I thought it was a bug, but it was way too big. Much bigger than a bug, or me, or my pretend father even. Then it stopped and looked at me. I screamed, and then got panicked. I didn't know what I was more afraid of, the big thing crawling behind the blood door, or my pretend parents hearing my scream and coming to tell me what to do. Then the big thing crawled forward, squeezing himself into the doorway until his face was close to mine. It was a weird face. Big and square, with black paint on his lips and white skin and eyes as blue as the sky. He propped his chin on his hand and said, "What are you doing, little boy? Opening my front door without even knocking? TSK, TSK. I was so scared I cried. The big man pouched out his lip and crossed his ankles. I saw the shadow it made, like a stretched out X, on my blood blanket. "Oh, don't cry, little boy. Please don't cry. I was only joking." But I couldn't help it. I was so afraid, and he was so scary. Besides, I didn't know what he meant. I didn't know what joking was. I had never heard that word. What's joking? The man's mouth fell open. His painted black lips scared me, but they looked funny too. Like he was a clown or a doll, or a puppet, just like me. "You poor child. You poor, poor boy." He reached out with a hand bigger than my head and patted my arm. I flinched. I knew that word, because my pretend parents often punished me for flinching. But the scary man didn't punish me for flinching. He didn't even yell at me, he only cried, his eyes filled with tears. They shone in his eyes like melted silver. They didn't look real. But I didn't know that, because even though I cried a lot, I never saw anyone else cry, so I didn't know what tears look like. "What's wrong?" I asked. He wiped his eyes. The silvery tears hung onto his fingers and slid down slowly, like they were dancing. They looked pretend, but when he flicked them off and they landed on me, they felt real. Just like my own tears when they fell on my skin. "I'm sorry for crying. It's just that a little boy who doesn't know what a joke is very sad business." His voice sounded thick and sad but so funny. So funny it made me laugh even though I was afraid. Then the scary man reached down and pulled up the edge of my blanket off my bed, and he blew his nose. That wasn't funny at all. At first I thought it wasn't funny because it was gross and it was my blanket. Snot is gross. I know about snot, but then I remembered it wasn't funny because the blanket wasn't real. It was just a blood blanket on a blood bed that I drew on the hard floor. Only it wasn't a blood blanket anymore. It was real. The bed too. Real just like the blood door. Before I could stop myself, I wondered if my city was real, too. But I was too scared to ask that. Instead I just asked again, "What's joking?" He blew his nose again. A joke is something funny. Something that makes you laugh. I get in trouble if I laugh. He crooked his hand and put his chin in it again. He was so big and he didn't really look like people. He looked like something pretending to be people. It was very scary, but my pretend parents were scary, and they were people who were not pretending to be people. They really were just people, so I thought maybe something pretending to be people would be safer. "In my city bright," said the big man, "we tell jokes every day. More jokes than anyone could tell in a lifetime." "Are there bees there? In your city?" He held his hands out. "Many bees. Bees everywhere you look. As many bees as there are jokes. And nobody, nowhere in the entire city, who will ever stop you from laughing. Least of all me." He pulled a funny face. Even though it was funny, it gave me goosebumps. But I laughed. "See? I can make you laugh. It will be my life's work to make sure you laugh every day." He scooted backward, shuffling out to clear the doorway. "Come in," he said. "Come into my city and I will teach you about jokes." But I was afraid. I was so afraid I started to cry. Because I thought my pretend parents would find out about this and come down to tell me what to do. Then I thought that maybe the big scary man was a trick. That my pretend parents were using him to trick me into talking to strangers. That I'd crawl through the door and they would be waiting for me and make me bleed everywhere for talking to strangers and trying to leave. I started to cry again because I was so scared. He started to cry again too, which scared me even more. I was just sure that my pretend parents were waiting for me. I was too afraid to move. All I could do was sit there and cry and wait for them to come out and tell me what to do. The big scary man crawled away so I couldn't see him anymore. I thought he was getting my pretend parents. Telling them how bad I was. How I talked to strangers. How I tried to leave. I was so scared that even though I was crying, I wasn't making any sounds. It was hard to breathe. I was wheezing, like when they showed me my mouse who crawled into my hands. Have you ever been too scared to scream? I have, lots of times. But that was the time I was more scared than ever. Suddenly the scary man crawled back, wriggling like a worm on his elbows because his hands were folded. They were folded in a circle, like this. I used to fold my hands this way when I was holding my mouse. The scary man gave me a smile, then opened his hands. I flinched, bees flew out, they were shiny like his tears, and big. Big like my thumb, and when I saw them, I knew the scary man wasn't my pretend parents. My pretend parents would never be friends with anyone who touches bees, so I wasn't afraid anymore. I have other business to attend to, the big scary man said. But I don't want to leave you alone, so take these bees and have a very good night, my son. He scrunched backward through the door and closed it. I held the bees in my hand like the scary man did until I started falling asleep. I let them go and they crawled away. I saw their shiny silver bodies wriggle and burrow into the walls, just like the big scary man wriggled backward through the blood door. I smiled and went to sleep. When I woke up, the door was just a blood door again, and my bed was just a blood bed, but my blanket was still real. My pretend parents came downstairs to tell me what to do. When they saw the blanket, they thought I stole it from my pretend brother and hurt me so bad I couldn't even use my blood to draw anymore. I stayed on the floor all day. It was so cold I shivered. Shivering hurt, but I couldn't stop. After it got dark, I saw lights in the wall. Golden skinny lights, like when light comes through cracks under doors. It was the blood door. It was real again, it opened. The scary man was behind it. He smiled and waved, but I just tried to crawl away. Go away, I said. You got me in big trouble. He didn't go away. He reached out and grabbed my arm. I flinched. Who did this to you? The scary man asked. I told him everything. At the end, he clicked his tongue. The shiny bees came crawling out of the burrows in the wall and walked onto me. They stung me. It didn't hurt, though. Not at all. The stings just made me feel better. They stung until all the blood was gone and I didn't hurt anymore at all. Then the big scary man invited me through the blood door. He held out his hand. I took it. He pulled me through. It was like being on a water slide. I didn't know what that was then, but I do now because there are water slides behind the blood doors. I used to play on them all the time before you caught me. Behind the blood door was the most beautiful and most horrible place I have ever seen. I loved it, but I hated it. I wanted to go inside it, but I wanted to run away and never see it again, even if that meant going back to my pretend parents and doing what I was told. It was just too much, and it made me cry. The big scary man slapped his forehead. Stupid, stupid. I took you to the grown-up city. You need to go to the playground. What's a playground? That made the big man cry big silvery tears again. When he was done crying, he took me to the playground. It was wonderful and wondrous. That's how he described it, and he was right. He's always right. It never got dark. It never got cold. It was full of golden light and waterfalls and treehouses and playhouses and tunnels and burrows and secret hideaways. Best of all, there were bees everywhere, but I did not see any other children. Are there other kids? I asked. He slapped his head again and made a big surprised face with his blue eyes and black lips. Of course. A boy needs friends. How could I forget? Sometimes you forget things when you're old. I forget a lot of things, so I must be getting very old. He shook his head and sighed. That's what we dads are, you know, old. Are you a dad? Of course. I'm your dad. That made me so happy that I laughed. I laughed for a long time. That's when I started to understand about jokes, when I was so happy I couldn't stop laughing. That was such a good joke. The big scary man was a good dad. He showed me around the playground and then he took me to a school because that's where friends are, only I never saw a school before. I had never met any kids except my pretend brother, so I didn't know what to do. There were so many of them and it was so loud. I got scared and sat down in the middle of the sidewalk and had to try very hard not to cry. When he saw how scared I was, my new dad apologized. No one ever apologized to me before. It made me so happy I cried, then hugged him and told him it was okay and he didn't need to apologize. He said, "Of course I have to. Apologies are the right thing to do when you're wrong, always." He was right. My new dad is always right. Then he took me away from the school and we went somewhere I did recognize, a bedroom. A nice one like my pretend brother had. There was a little girl in the bed. We woke her up and took her under the bed to the playground. She was scared when she saw my new dad. She was scared when she saw me. She was scared when we brought her to the playground in B City. She was scared when I told her to stop being scared, but she wasn't scared after the bees stung her. We played for a long time. I don't know how many days, because the sun never goes down there, but when I was finally done playing, my friend looked sick. You could see all her bones and her eyes looked like stars and her mouth was so big and it wouldn't stay shut. There were holes in her, too. So many holes from all the bee stings. Since my friend couldn't play anymore, I gave her to the bees. They crawled into all the holes from all the stings and buzzed. The humming sounded like singing. Quiet singing. I didn't know the word yet, but it sounded like a lullaby. I know that word now, and that's definitely what it sounded like, a lullaby. The bees made honey, too. Golden shiny honey, just like the light. It dripped out and made the grass sticky. When the bees got done making honey, my friend crawled into secret tunnel under the playhouse and started to sing. The way she sang made me laugh. A joke. My dad told me there were lots of jokes in Bee City, and he was right. He's always right. My new dad helped me find lots of friends after that. It was fun. I always laughed when they were scared, and I laughed when the bees stung them to make them stop being scared. I laughed at the funny ways they played. It was so many jokes, just like my new dad said, and my new dad is always right, but slowly, it stopped being funny and I stopped laughing at the jokes. I didn't like how my friends were all scared at first. It reminded me of how I got scared whenever I got told what to do by my pretend parents. It made me think that maybe I wasn't making friends, maybe I was just telling them what to do. I don't want to tell anybody what to do. I just want friends. Real friends. You were my real friend, Wendy. So why did you run away? When the bees started making honey inside my fifth friend, I told my new dad I didn't want to do this to my friends anymore. Who will you play with, if not friends? I thought I was going to say nobody, but I was wrong. Instead of saying nobody, I smiled a little. My brother. My new dad gave me a very weird look. He leaned in with one eye big. I don't know how else to say it. He just leaned down and got close until his big eye was almost touching mine, then he smiled big. Big as a wolf. Let's get the boy his brother. He took me to my pretend brother's bedroom. I always wanted his bedroom, remember? I was so jealous that he was a good boy and that I was a bad boy even though I always did what I was told. I did what I was told because I thought that's how you get your own room. I thought that's how pretend parents turn into real parents. It isn't. That's what my new dad told me, and he was right. My new dad is always right. My pretend brother was very scared when he saw us and even more scared when he took him under the bed to get to the playground, but just like all the others he stopped being scared when the bees stung him. I laughed when he stopped being scared. It was funny. It was a good joke, just like my new dad said. He was right. He's always right. I played with my pretend brother for a long time. Finally he fell down, and I gave him to the bees. I made sure he was full of bees. Fuller than any of my other friends. I turned him into a beehive. I turned him into a honeycomb. My new dad said he was colonized. I let him sing afterward, but I didn't let him crawl into the playhouse under the tunnel because I had a different idea. But I wasn't sure it was a good idea, so I asked my new dad for advice. When I told him, he hugged me and said it was the best idea he's ever heard. And my new dad is always right. Then my new dad drew me a blood door right back into my old basement. I put my pretend brother on the basement floor. Honey leaked from all the honeycomb holes and from his eyes. Then I hid in the corner and waited for my pretend parents to come downstairs to tell me what to do. When my pretend father came downstairs and saw my pretend brother, he screamed and screamed and screamed, and that was before he saw the bees. They weren't big bees, but they all had big, long stingers, just like my blood drawings. When the bees were done with him, he didn't look like my pretend father. He didn't even look pretend anymore. He looked like something else. Something too scary to be a monster but also too silly to be scary. Lumpy in so many different bruise colors. His lip swelled so big it was almost as big as my hand, and one of his eyelids looked like a big lumpy ball. All of him was like that. All of him was so swollen and so lumpy. So scary, but so silly, too. When he stopped moving, the bees crawled back into my pretend brother and kept making more honey. They made so much it dripped out of the holes and made a big puddle that spread all the way across the floor and touched my feet. I dipped my finger in it and ate it until my pretend mother came. Her screams were even worse. They made me laugh so much. I think her screams were the best joke I ever heard. Wendy, I told you about that joke, remember? After you told me I didn't live in Bee City, I lived in Neverland. I told you about all the jokes. You didn't laugh, though. Is that why you ran away, Wendy? Because no one told you what jokes are. Wendy, why did you run away? You won't run away again. My new dad promised, and my new dad is always right. This is all kinds of fucked up and I don't know where to start. It almost makes me wish I could interview myself just to get my thoughts straight, but I can't. I grew up in and out of foster care. My third foster home was bad. Not the worst, but still bad. The kind where the kids aren't allowed any autonomy at all. You couldn't eat, sleep, bathe, get dressed, or even pee except at scheduled times. I had never felt so out of control in my life. To cope, I brought back the imaginary friend I'd had when I super small. Not because I really believed in him, I was 7 years old by that point, and had known what was real and what wasn't for much longer, but because it was literally the only way to have something that my foster family could not control. As a kid, my favorite movie was Peter Pan. I definitely see the appeal that the whole escaping into a magical realm run by kids where the only villains are grown-ups held for a kid in my situation, but I didn't think too deeply about it. I only bring it up because I named my imaginary friend after him. When I brought him back in that foster home, I kept the name. Anyway, at first Peter was just a carbon copy of the cartoon. He was invisible to everyone but me. No one could hear him except me. I never had to talk out loud to him, because he could read my thoughts. This made it so we could play games all day every day, and no one could stop me. It was innocent at first, but it got really weird really fast. Almost immediately he insisted he came from a place called Bee City. I found that supremely irritating because he was Peter Pan, and everyone knows Peter Pan comes from Never Never Land. I told him so. I also lied about my name, and told him my name was Wendy and that anybody calling me different was lying. He stopped looking like cartoon Peter too. He was still a little boy in a hat, but he was a real-looking little boy with like dot-around hat and big wings. Not feathery wings, but wings like a bug. He had sad eyes, so sad that after a while I didn't like looking at him even though he was pretend. After all this happened, I didn't think about it that much. I assumed that his steadily darker character was simply a reflection of how I was feeling at the time. I felt out of control, so he got more out of control. I was scared, so he got scary. Common sense, right? Literally a projection of what was going on inside me. One day, Peter hurt one of my foster siblings for calling me by my real name instead of Wendy. I stopped him. But because he was invisible, everyone thought it was me and I got in massive trouble. While they figured out what to do with me, they put me out in the yard and forced me to hang wet bedding out to dry in the cold. That's a form of torture. Especially for a second grader who can't even reach the clothesline without jumping. Don't believe me? Give it a shot, then come back to talk to me. While I was hanging laundry, Peter came back. I told him I didn't want to see him, so he said, let's do jokes instead, and started hiding behind the sheets. It was so fucking creepy, so creepy I basically forgot he wasn't real. I was mad at him for not leaving, so I started chasing him, pulling the sheets off the lines so he wouldn't have anywhere to hide. But he was always faster than me, flitting back and forth. Every time I saw his shadow, I tore a sheet down only to see that shadow behind another sheet. That's when I remembered something about Peter Pan. About how his shadow isn't always attached to him. How it can peel away and do its own thing. And somehow I knew he was behind me. Had been this whole entire time. I just knew. I dropped the freezing sheet in my hands and turned around. Peter stood there, half hidden by the last billowing sheet, smiling. But he didn't look like Peter. He looked like a monster. Worse than a monster. An insectal, corrupted, not even human, with a wraparound smile dripping honey. I screamed and ran, tripping over the sheet. It tangled around my ankles and I fell face first in the cold mud, but I got up and kept running. That was the worst trouble I've ever gotten in, ever. Hurting a fake sibling? Bad, not doing chores? Worse, tearing all the clean bedding off the clotheslines and dropping them in the mud? Worst. The trouble I got into was so bad, and the terror that came with being in trouble so acute, that it actually kind of drove Peter out of my head. I was hysterical, so scared I felt I was within an inch of my life from this monster hunting me in the backyard, but he still wasn't as scary as my foster parents. So scared that when I started flashing back during that interview, that's what I was afraid of. Isn't that insane? Anyway, during and especially after the interview, I was a wreck. Like this dredged up memories I didn't even realize I still had. I wanted out. I tried to get out. You know who tried to let me out? Christoph. You know who shoved me right back in? Charlie. You know who shoved Charlie out of the way and came in and sat with me until the interview was done? Yeah, I was surprised too. He actually kept me pretty calm. Calm enough until Piero called me Wendy, and then I just lost it. I don't even remember all that much, except for Christoph bellowing and Charlie placating and Commander Wingeride. Where did he even come from? Yelling about the Harlequin and how had no one ever made the connection. At some point after that I just sort of came into awareness again, almost like I'd been under twilight anesthesia. I was in a chair in the dining area, painfully aware of a dozen staff members looking on as I sobbed my heart out. Christoph was kneeling beside, holding and rubbing my hands the way my mom used to when I was sick. The way I knew his own mother had once held his hands after she'd scared him to death. Unbidden, I remembered the cryptic warning I'd received just yesterday. Christoph is the only one who gives a shit about any of the inmates, including you. I almost pulled away anyway, but I was so desperate for any comfort that I squeezed back. When he noticed, he said, "What happened? You know that thing? That boy?" I shrugged. I thought he was my imaginary friend when I was little. The searching look he gave me was so un-Christoph-like that for a second I wondered if it was something pretending to be him. Did you know he was here? I didn't even know he was real. That look again. Why did he call you Wendy? For the first time since I walked into the interview room, my instinct kicked in. The one that tells me what to say and how to say it in order to get something beneficial to me, and without even thinking, I threw one of Christoph's myriad creeptastic retorts back in his face. "We can talk later, but only if you're brave enough to come to me all alone." He looked as if I'd slapped him, then the shock cracked apart and he started laughing. So did I. By this point everyone, and by everyone, I mean about a dozen other personnel trying to eat their lunch in peace, was watching us, so I got up to leave. Christoph followed. "I'm okay," I said immediately. "You're lying. Even if I am wrong, the commander is going to come for you and he won't care that you're not okay. Do you want to talk to him now? No. Then I will keep him away until you feel better." "Why are you doing this?" I asked. "Making sure all of you feel safe is part of my work. It is the only part one like." He tapped his jaw. "The only part that doesn't need teeth." He sounded so earnest that I didn't even have the heart to tell him he is the only thing in the pantheon that always makes me feel unsafe. He walked me to my room, patted me awkwardly on the shoulder, and headed back to the front of the hallway, ostensibly to head off Commander Wingeride. It's been a few hours, and to his credit he's kept everyone away. I don't even know why I'm procrastinating. It's not like I'll figure any of this out without talking to somebody who knows more, and I do want to know, but I'm also afraid of what I'm going to find out, and I still have no idea what to think about anything. Not about Peter Poirot and what that means, or what the agency knows about me that I don't, or what they're going to do to me, or what this means for our upcoming Harlequin hunt, and I certainly no longer know what to think about Christoph. On one hand, the person who told me to be Christoph's friend clearly knew what he was talking about. On the other, I will literally never be able to forget what he's done or what he is. As terrible as it feels to admit, though, having a big bad wolf as a guard dog is probably not the worst development at this point.
History 2.
Fuck HIPAA, my new patient is literally possessed. On December 21, 2017, sheriff deputies responded to a wellness check in the general area of Tehachapi, California. The call came from the mother of a minor child who stated that the child's uncle had lured them out there to attack without provocation. The man attacked and gave chase, going so far as to pursue their car on foot as she drove away. Officers located the man and quickly noted that his behavior was vacillated wildly. Initially, he launched himself at the officers, only to pull back, fall to his knees, and beg for help. He introduced himself as Cataline and asked for help again, only to cut off and begin screaming the following phrase, "Fuck you, Robert. Fuck you, Robert. Fuck you." Cataline was booked into the central receiving facility. Cataline's appearance was of great concern. Most disturbingly, both his chest and abdomen kept bulging and receding, rolling like waves. Whenever one of these waves crested, Cataline choked and his eyes turned a strange but unmistakable yellow hue. Shortly after booking, Cataline asked for a chaplain. This request was denied. Shortly after denial, Catalan flew into what was assumed to be a substance-induced frenzy wherein he tore the metal grating off his cell and proceeded to vomit copious amounts of dark, foul-smelling fluid. The volume of vomit was so significant it covered all of the cell floor and much of the hallway beyond. Officers noted that Cataline's eyes were glowing yellow. A chaplain was called. Cataline said he didn't know how to pray but needed someone to pray for him. The chaplain asked why, to which Cataline responded that he was possessed. The chaplain asked, somewhat doubtfully, if Cataline was hoping for an exorcism. This question incited a hysterical outburst from Cataline, who repeatedly screamed, "No exorcism! No exorcism! It has to stay inside." Due to prior experience with another agency inmate, a representative from the sheriff's office facilitated contact between Cataline and an agency representative. After a brief interview, the agency brought Cataline into custody where he remains. At this time, Cataline is the only confirmed case of demonic possession incarcerated at AHH NASCU. Cataline is a 34-year-old male approximately 5 feet 6 inches tall. One eye is brown, and one is yellow. He suffers extensive chronic bruising on his chest, stomach, and back. He has a full-body matrix-like rash that has been described as web-like. Cataline is pleasant and cooperative, although he suffers from major depressive disorder and severe anxiety relating to the possibility that the entity inside him will escape. He has also expressed severe anxiety over the question of who or what will keep the entity contained once he dies. Given that Cataline is at essentially biological maximum security prison and that containment of his prisoner aligns with agency directives, he has been granted T-class designation. Interview subject: the jar of clay. Classification string: cooperative/destructible/gay/constant/moderate/unknown. Periodic re-evaluation required. Interviewer: Rochelle B. Interview date: December 3, 24. Lying isn't always a sin, but I still don't forgive Robert for the lies he told. Robert lost his life. That's what his mother says. Robert lost his life. That's a lie. Robert didn't lose his life. He stole it from himself, but I get it. Sometimes a good lie is the only tether to your sanity. The lasso keeping your demons at bay. Maybe if Robert had told himself more lies, he'd still be alive, but maybe not, because Robert already lied a lot. Lies like, "I'm okay, you don't have to worry about me, everything's fine, dumbass." Really? If I could, I'd say, "Fuck you, Robert. Fuck you for lying. Fuck you for hiding. Fuck you for letting me love you so much for so long. Fuck you for loving me so much for so long." He used to say I was the only person who made him comfortable. Paradoxically, comfort made Robert uncomfortable. Whenever he felt too comfortable for too long, he ruined it. He ruined it for the last time by launching into a gloriously unhinged rant that ended with him telling me, "You're the only thing that feels like home and I love you so much, but I hate you even more and that will never stop." I don't think he was lying when he said that, which is why I left. his mom found him 9 days later. Broke into his apartment. Saw him slumped against his bathroom wall, and immediately took 7 pictures of his body that she texted to me along with the message, "Are you happy now, you fucking freak?" The pictures were bad because he'd been dead for a while. But the decomposition wasn't the worst. The worst was the smallness of him. How flat, how hollow, how empty he looked. Not like there was nothing left, but like there had never been anything at all. His mom barred me from his funeral. I didn't hold it against her. She needed someone to blame, and strictly speaking, I am to blame for a lot of Robert's misery. But at the same time, holy shit. We never dated. We never even tried. We were too enmeshed. Too damaged. And we knew each other too well. When you truly know someone and that someone truly knows you, it's not romantic. It's not beautiful. It's just terrifying, and even if that's not true, so what? The last thing Robert ever said to me was, "You're the only thing that's ever felt like home and I love you so much, but I hate you even more and that will never stop." And the last thing I ever said to him was, "Fuck you, Robert." 6 days later, he was dead. 3 days after that, his mother found his body and sent me pictures. I stared at those photos for a long time. Then I watched The Land Before Time. That was Robert's favorite kid movie. That's why he named our cat Littlefoot. I thought watching it in memory of him would make me feel close to him, but it just made me sob until I thought I was going to throw up my own guts. A few days after that, his mom sent me the last text I ever got from her. "There's a bunch of your shit at his apartment, so come get it before I burn it." I could think of nothing worse than entering Robert's death-suffused apartment. But curiosity is the leading cause of death for cats, and I am no exception. See, Robert and I never lived together. We were never even romantic. Enmeshed, yes. Devoted, of course. Codependent. You bet, but in love, no. Not really. God, I hope not. Anyway, Robert was almost dangerously protective of his private spaces, and his cheap apartment was no exception. I'd only ever been inside it twice, so I wanted to know how anything that was mine could have possibly ended up there. That's the only reason I went. Curiosity. The scent of death was waiting for me when I opened the door, but it wasn't as strong as I'd feared. I drifted through his apartment like a ghost, traversing the liminal space it now occupied between Robert's home and an empty place. I wondered if his ghost was walking with me. The thought was infuriating. I crept through the living room, kitchen, hallway, even the bathroom with its body-shaped stain. I took more time than I should have. I didn't see anything that was mine until his bedroom. Utilitarian and bare. Colorless and impersonal, it made me ache. The only pop of color was a lilac moto jacket draped over a cardboard box. I recognized the jacket because I'd given it to him years ago, on the day I told him I was transitioning. That was also the day he fucked up beyond repair with Cassie and their daughter. I picked the jacket up. For half a second I was convinced he was inside it, growing back into existence in my arms. Mostly because I could smell him warm, with a faint undertone of bitter growth. Like a dying garden in the dog days of summer, as his scent enveloped me, the room around me faded into a whirlwind of images, enfolding me into yet another liminal space, this time the one between memory and reality, that brings me to the real reason I didn't want to go to Robert's apartment. There's this thing I do. If I touch an object, and if that object is or was important to someone, then the memories attached to that object start projecting themselves in my head like a simulation. It sounds crazy. It is crazy. When I picked up Robert's jacket, I fell into one of the memories attached to it: gray skies, bitter air swirling with snowflakes. I was sitting on the sidewalk with Robert. He was heartbroken and humiliated. He'd so badly wanted a family and had managed to make one. But he'd fucked it up, just like he fucked up everything else. Cassie had the patience of a saint combined with the naivety singular to very young women intent on healing their damaged boyfriends, but Robert was too much even for her. She'd been right to leave him and he knew it, so there was nothing to say. Seeing him curled over himself and sobbing so hard his entire body shook was one of the worst moments of my life. And that's saying a lot. I shrugged out of my jacket and threw it over his shoulders, then drew him in for a hug as some stranger gawked at us. It was awkward. All my hugs are awkward. But Robert leaned in anyway and kept crying, tears hitting the jacket alongside snowflakes. Then the memory changed. Snowflakes faded to darkness, cold deepened to warmth. Robert was sleeping, curled underneath that stupid coat. 1,000 images of 1,000 nights superimposed over each other, each almost but not quite identical. He slept with it. Used it like a teddy bear. The scene evaporated when I threw the coat back onto his bed. Tears streamed down my face as a fresh wave of rage crashed inside my chest. I looked at the box again. It had my name written on it, Cataline. On top was a note, "Please don't remember the bad things." "Oh, fuck you," I whispered. I recognized everything inside. The ragged stuffed Pikachu with a sunken face. The dusty blue ribbon from a spelling bee 20 years past. A hand-knitted orange scarf. A green collar with a silver tag that said Littlefoot on one side and if found, contact Katerina or Robert with my childhood phone number listed underneath. The thought of him holding onto all of these things for so long was too much. Beyond too much. Crushing. Fuck, it was crippling. If I were strong, I'd have left that box and everything in it on the bed for his mother to burn, but I'm not strong, so I shrugged into the jacket. Snowflakes swirled again as his scent, so like a dead garden, crept over me, and took the box to my car. Then I drove out to the carnival. Neither Robert or I ever left the town where we were born. It sucks, but living and dying in the same place does have perks like knowing all the awesome secret hangout spots. One of our spots was an abandoned carnival out in the canyon. 70 years ago, a carnival stopped in town the night before the most devastating earthquake in the county's history. All the performers died. A few of the animals survived, but they had neither ability nor inclination to pack away the game booths and rides. The big top is long gone, the prizes pilfered or rotted into the sand. But the structures remain, and the great rusted loop of the sketchiest looking roller coaster ever made still rises over the desert. Robert and I weren't in love. At least I don't think so. Shit, I hope not. We were enmeshed, though. Beyond enmeshed. The carnival isn't where it started, but it's relevant because it is the place where I first saw Robert's demon. Yes. His demon, a demon, followed him around. A literal demon. I already told you I see memories when I touch things. I also see memories when I touch people. I always saw Robert's, too. But after my mom died, I started seeing something else when I touched Robert, his demon. We were 10, and we'd snuck off to the carnival after school. I hugged him, I don't remember why anymore. When I pulled away, I saw the demon between us. It looked almost like his dad, just wrong. Like something pretending to be him, just way scarier. Before I knew it, the demon, the crooked, uncanny valley imitation of his father, slithered forward, pushing us apart. Then it wrenched Robert's mouth open. Before I could even react, Robert screamed and shoved me away. I know how it sounds. Even after we talked about it, after Robert calmed down, after told me how he'd seen that thing crawling after him every day for as long as he could remember, I didn't think much of it. I actually kind of thought we were both losing it. And I wasn't even worried. That kind of hallucination made perfect sense to me, given that Robert's father killed my mother. See, when my dad walked out, Robert's father stepped up. He started dating my mom. I know having a parent move on is usually hard for kids, but I didn't care because I got to see Robert every day, until his dad killed my mom, and then himself. Afterward, I visited Robert at his foster home whenever I could. All he did was sleep when I came over. He was afraid to sleep alone. Well, no, technically, he was afraid to lay down. He was afraid he'd die if he laid down too long. This is because he watched his dad die flat on his back, drowning in his own blood from his self-inflicted gunshot wound, so whenever I came over, we sat back to back, leaning against each other. Then we looped our arms together. For weeks, that was the only way he could sleep, leaning against me, because he knew I wouldn't let him fall. Anyway, that doesn't matter. What matters is this: the day I saw Robert's demon for the first time, Robert said, "It's my dad, and he keeps telling me to kill you." But I never would, Kat. Never. I knew Robert would never hurt me. He was so relieved when I told him that. The day I picked up the box from Robert's apartment, I sat under the roller coaster remembering all of this. I fell asleep, half hoping the rusted, sand-scoured metal would collapse and crush me. It didn't. I went on with my life, only not really. In the weeks following Robert's death, I had to hold stuffed animals to help me sleep. I collect used stuffed animals because there are almost always happy memories attached to them. And because they're not my memories, they comfort me without any baggage, but grief is weird, and one night I needed the baggage. I grabbed that sunken little Pikachu from Robert's box. The memory washed over me, a frozen winter's night, so cold it takes your breath away. We were at a buffet with both sets of parents. Robert and I were misbehaving. Robert had beaten up the buffet mascot, which made me laugh so hard I gagged. Once seated, we got into a food fight. When my mom yelled at us, I yelled back, which made Robert laugh so hard that Dr. Pepper came out his nose and sprayed everything on the table. My father promised to let us play the claw machine if we'd shut up and behave. We loved claw machines, so of course we agreed. He gave us each $10 to play. Robert didn't win, but I got a small stuffed Pikachu. I gave it to him because he loved Pokemon. Reliving that memory was like holding Robert on one of his good days. The good days were the only days Robert and I ever held each other, and we didn't have many good days. I told you I see memories when I touch things and people. That's why I didn't shake your hand when you came in, and why I hate being touched. You think you're going in for a regular handshake when a wave of unspeakable trauma washes over you, and you have to smile like you didn't just mainline hell. I know that's why Robert barely let me touch him. And to be fair, I didn't ever let him touch me because Robert is the only person who saw into me the way I saw into him. I didn't like being seen any more than he did. That's why we fought at the end, because he saw into me at the exact wrong time. It was my birthday. Robert surprised me my mom's brownie recipe. And you know, it was my birthday. I was thinking about her anyway, and the brownies just drove it all home. I started wishing for what might have been. For the life I'd have if she was still in it. It made me cry. I don't usually cry. I wasn't even crying hard. But I was crying enough for Robert to notice. He came in for a hug before I could put my shields up. I will never forget his face, the shock, the guilt, the sadness, and the rage. I'll never forget his voice, either, when he said, "No matter what I do or how long it's been, that's always going to be the first thing you think when you look at me. That's why you won't, why will never, that's not why, Robert." I don't really know how we got from "that's not why" to "you're the only thing that ever felt like home and I love you. But I hate you even more." But we did. That's another reason I know lying isn't always a sin, because if Robert hadn't seen the truth in me that day, I think he would still be alive. The night after I held the Pikachu, I watched The Land Before Time again. It made me remember Littlefoot, our cat. That made me go back to Robert's box and pull out Littlefoot's collar. It's my favorite memory of all time, which is why I can barely stand to remember it. We were 6 years old, playing in the yard on a golden, impossibly hot day. We heard a pitiful, tiny meow and followed it to the alley behind my house. It was suffocatingly hot, even in the shade where we saw the meower, a little gray cat. Robert named him immediately, and we went to bug my mom for a collar. She took us to buy a collar and even a name tag. It was a little green heart. Robert tenderly clasped it around Kitten's neck as it clambered into his lap, purring. I looked up. There, in the memory I knew so well, was something I had never seen before: Robert's demon, grinning at us across the yard, but instead of looking like a wrong version of Robert's dad, it looked like a wrong version of Robert. I dropped the collar back into the box, gasping like I'd just been plunged into ice water. I don't know what I thought. I'd only ever seen the demon when I touched Robert. Not in other memories, not in real life. Just when I touched Robert, so I decided that it was my mind playing tricks, turning Robert into a monster for leaving me. I didn't think about it again for a week. When I picked up the ragged little Pikachu for another devastation binge, I luxuriated in the claw machine memory again until I saw the way my dad looked at Robert. Distaste. Pure distaste. Robert had adored my dad, but Dad hated Robert and didn't even try to hide it. If lying isn't always a sin, then telling the truth sometimes is. My dad's open disdain for a child made him one hell of a sinner. As if to emphasize that, I saw the demon standing over his shoulder, leering at me. Half its face looked like the wrong Robert monster. But half its face just looked like Robert, and that half was screaming. I dropped the Pikachu and put on the jacket. The snowy day memory descended, including the gawping figure on my periphery. But when I focused on that figure, it was Demon Robert. Feeling very frightened, I picked up the blue ribbon, 4th grade, exactly 3 weeks after his dad killed my mom. Robert's first day back at school. I'd been back for a week already, subsuming my grief in the school spelling bee, which I'd just won. I smiled as I marched off stage because it was the only way to keep from screaming. But the smile was breaking apart. Tears were welling up even as that awful grin spread so wide it felt like it was splitting my head in half. I found Robert in the crowd, locking on him like a drowning person on a life raft. He looked hollow and ancient, but when he saw me, he smiled back. When I sat by him, he started to cry. He was still smiling, though. Just like me, what's wrong? I asked. I thought you wouldn't want to be my friend anymore. Why? My dad said so. After he died. He told me it's all my fault. I hugged him with particular fierceness, then pinned my ribbon onto his shirt. You're my best friend, Robert. That will never stop. No lie? No lie. As the words left my mouth, I saw the demon over his shoulder. Half monster, half screaming Robert, I dropped the ribbon and picked up the scarf. I'd knitted it for him when we were 11. He wore it until junior high. I found myself transported to his foster home 20 years ago. We were on his narrow bed, sitting back to back with our arms looped and the scarf draped across both our shoulders. Cat. His voice reverberated through his back and into mine. I'm so scared. I see my dad every night. He keeps telling me to kill you. I looked over and saw Demon Robert in the closet. One half of his face was grinning, the other was screaming, gasping. I tossed the scarf away and picked up the last thing in the box, a picture of his daughter, Sadie. I recognized that picture. It had held pride of place on every bathroom mirror Robert had since the breakup. Why was it in my box? Surely he meant for Cassie to have it, or even his mom. Why me? I looked at that photo for what felt like a long time, then I picked it up. The memory I saw was of Robert's suicide. He'd been holding it when he killed himself, when he lost his life. As I stood over his bleeding body, screaming, something crawled out of him. A thing that looked like him, but like a broken version of him. A version of him with half a face that was his, and half a face that was a demon. Before I could move, that thing took my hands. The touch calmed me down because I knew that touch. Whatever else this thing was, it was at least partly Robert. That was enough to make me hug it. Help Sadie, he whispered. His voice was wrong but familiar, just like the rest of him. I can't keep it away from her, but you can. You're a jar of clay. You hold everything in and never let anything out. Unbidden, an image rose to mind of Sadie. Sadie with a face that was half hers, and half grinning monster. It made me want to scream. How do I help her? By remembering the treasure, he said, and putting the bad things in and not letting them out. Then he was gone, and so was the memory. I was back in my room, clutching his daughter's baby picture and sobbing. He used to call me that. A jar of clay. Some religious reference. His dad was pretty religious before. Well, you know. I asked him to explain it once. He said a jar of clay is an everlasting receptacle both for treasure and for things that need to be locked away. That's you, he said. It's a good thing, I promise. No lie? I asked. No lie. I still didn't really get it, but that didn't stop him from calling me a jar of clay. Anyway, it'd take too long to tell you everything that happened after I saw Robert's suicide memory. It would hurt too much besides, and this has already been so long and painful. I'm sorry. If I tell you more than the bare minimum, I won't be able to talk. This is all I can say. You know how I said Robert and I knew each other better than we knew ourselves? That's how I knew what he, or at least his ghost, or whatever it was, wanted me to do. He wanted me to share all the good memories with his daughter while making sure his demon didn't come for her. I tracked down everything of his that I could find. It was hard. His mother had already taken so much, and there was no chance that she'd let me into her house. Instead, I started where I could, my dad's house, where Robert and I spent so much time and left so much shit over the course of our childhood. It was hard being there. It was hard when my dad wouldn't meet my eyes, and even harder when I accidentally caught him looking. I ignored him and got it to work. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I knew it when I found it. It was Robert's stuffed dog. An ancient Steve dog, kind of an heirloom. One his dad had before him, and his grandpa before that, and his great-grandfather before that. It was the only thing he'd been able to grab when CPS took him after the murder. The other kids at his foster home were assholes about it, so he hid it at my house and clearly forgot. When I picked up that dog, two things happened. First, I saw a memory from when we were 16. I was angry in giving him the silent treatment. That freaked him out. The silent treatment always freaked Robert out, unless he was the one giving it. He was trying to make me tell him what was wrong. You know what sucks? It wasn't that I didn't want to tell him, it was that I couldn't. That's one of the problems I always had with him. One of the things I always did to him. He called me a jar of clay again. You're one heavy motherfucking jar of clay. I wish I had half your stoicism, Cat. Really? No lie. That memory melted away, and others melted in. I don't know how to explain these memories. I told you that touching someone is a surefire way to mainline trauma. When I touched that toy dog, I mainlined pure horror. Robert and his father and his father and even his father, all carried and crushed by an overwhelming wave of horror, by a demon, his entire family, generation after generation, being stalked by this broken, grinning monster. Something that hunted them, that sank its claws in deep, deeper, deepest, until it pulled those claws down and shredded them to ribbons. One of those ribbons was Robert's father killing my mom. An older ribbon was his great-grandfather beating one of his own sons to death in a drunken rage, and one of those ribbons was Robert shooting himself in the head while holding his daughter's baby picture against his heart. But the memory showed me something even worse. This thing, this demon, this destroyer, wasn't just sinking its claws into Robert when he died. It was worming its way inside him. It was trying to take him over. To actually be Robert, because once it was Robert, it could and promised to do everything it wanted, and all it wanted was to destroy. It wanted to destroy his mom and Cassie. It wanted to destroy me. Most of all, it wanted to destroy Sadie, and it wanted to use Robert's hands. Robert fought, of course. Robert fought it his entire goddamn life, even before he knew what he was fighting. That was the reason he killed himself, because he was scared he was losing the fight, and he thought dying was the only way to protect who he loved. Once again, I didn't really know what I was looking for until I saw it, a Build-A-Bear I'd bought Sadie for her 6th birthday. I looked around to make sure Cassie wasn't watching, then picked it up, Robert's memory, he and Sadie sitting on the floor. If I ever scare you, or if there's something you don't ever want to tell me or your mom, you tell Uncle Cat, okay? He'll do anything to help you. He'll always keep you safe. I know, Daddy. Demon Robert crept up beside me. Together, we watched his memory. He didn't look like a demon anymore. Not even half of one. He just looked like Robert. I can't be you, Cat. I wish I could. I wish we could have been. But it ate me and it'll eat her. I thought I could save her, but I was wrong. You thought you could save me, but you were wrong. You can save her for me. Fuck you, Robert, I said. Fuck you. I threw the bear down and picked up something else, anything to not see the promise he made the daughter who wasn't mine or the broken version of his dead self begging me to right his wrongs. What I touched was a baby toy, a gentle memory. Robert playing with Sadie in a pool of sunlight on a threadbare carpet. All sweet, all good, all bright. Except for the demon lurking in the corner. I knew, then, what I had to do. What I wanted to do. Because Dad's right. A good man lives his life for other people. I don't know if I'm a good man. But Robert didn't know if he was a good man either, and he still lived his life for other people the very best he could. At that moment Sadie walked in, hollow-eyed and lifeless as Robert had been at spelling bee day all those years ago. I wiped my eyes and almost tried to smile, then thought better of it. Hi, Cat. She sat down across from me. She looked so much like Robert it took my breath away. She was 10, exactly the age he'd been when our parents died. Sadie, I said, gently. Your dad loved you more than anything. Her face crumpled. She shook her head, then started to get up. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the baby photo. Look. She looked at me, those eyes that were just like her father's filling with tears. Behind her, shimmering like a mirage, was an awful, familiar silhouette. The demon, a grinning monstrosity with no sign of Robert in its face. Her father's demon. Her birthright, coming into being to shred her like it had shredded her father. I had no time. I had to share the treasures, spill out all the treasure for other people to remember, so there'd be room to trap what could not be allowed to roam free. You see this picture? It's you. On your first birthday. He kept it everywhere he went. Even though he wasn't here, he kept you with him. She gave me a look I'd seen on her father's face 10,000 times. That's why I knew exactly what to do, which was stuff the photo into her hands. She climbed clumsily to her feet and bolted, but at least she took the photo with her. Is it true? I looked up, startled. Cassie was in the doorway. You don't have to lie for him. You shouldn't. I'm not lying. I wanted so badly to cry, but couldn't. The only reason he stayed away is he thought you were better off without him. That's all. The way her face twisted broke my heart all over again. Why? I don't know. Bullshit. You're the only one he ever talked to. That's not true. He wrote his suicide note for you. Her voice was longing and loathing in equal measure. It was one sentence. Just a single line telling me to remind you and Sadie how much he loves you. No lie. Only it was a lie. But when Cassie finally relaxed, I knew that it hadn't been a sin. We talked for a long time. When we were done, she gave me a hug. That's Cassie. No wonder Robert loved her. Then I went home and tried to make a plan. I knew what I had to do, but I wasn't sure how to do it, so I sat there for a while, thinking. I didn't know what the monstrosity was. A demon, probably. Isn't that what it always is? A demon from the depths of hell, come to torment the innocent. How do you defeat a demon? Having not stepped foot in a church since my mother died, I wasn't sure. But I'd absorbed enough religion and pop culture to know that Bibles and crosses were the first, main line of defense. So I dug out my mom's Bible and crucifix and held them, expecting something. Power, maybe. Hope, at least, but I felt nothing. It wasn't that they felt wrong. They just felt empty. Inert. No strength, no energy, no hope. Powerless. Inanimate. Dead. No, not dead. Things that had never been alive in the first place, so I thought harder. What is a demon? Hatred, as far as I could tell anyway. What's the opposite of hate? And that gave me an idea. I went to Robert's box and picked up the Pikachu. Instead of memory descending, warmth flowed through my hands. Living, moving, joyful, and powerful, so I stuffed the Pikachu in my back pocket. I pinned the spelling bee ribbon over my heart. I shrugged into the lilac jacket, heavy and reassuring on my shoulders. Most importantly of all, hanging from a chain where a normal person might wear a saint's medal, was Littlefoot's name tag. It felt warm and powerful in the hollow of my throat. These things felt right. They felt strong, and they felt true. Not exactly the stuff of which the armor of God is made. But they were reminders of the truest, fiercest love I've ever received and ever given, and that was armor enough. I drove out to the place it all began, our carnival, right under the rusting roller coaster. It was waiting for me. I wasn't afraid. I marched across the sand. Scraps of warm, loving memory drifted around me as the demon shimmered into being, a stark eternal darkness against the star-swept sky, and I felt it. It was evil, but it was power. True, incomprehensible power. Overwhelming, ravenous strength crashing over me and under me and around me like a cataclysmic earthquake, tearing my force field of memory, my shield of love, to shreds and the shreds into nothing. I wasn't mainlining trauma, I was mainlining hate. I knew, then, why Robert had been doomed to fail. This was a curse. This was a monster. This was darkness, this was the monster under the bed, this was selfishness, this was destruction, this was something other. This was the Borg, this was Morgoth. This was hatred incarnate. This was the total absence of love. This was an obscenity older than time, an abomination that wanted to sink its teeth into the throat that sings the song of creation and tear it out. Love was nothing against it, I was nothing against it, it was going to win, and its prize was worse than death, to take me over and use my hands to destroy, and it was all Robert's fault, as his demon's true form bore down on me, swelling and billowing across the sky, blotting the stars and laying bare the folly of my plan. Terror overwhelmed me, and despair, and hatred, but I didn't want to die that way. Not in the dark, hating the person I loved more than anything in the world. Without thinking, I cupped Littlefoot's name tag in both my hands. Warmth swallowed me, and light, and it was summer afternoon and Robert was tenderly clasping the collar across our kitten's neck. "You're not a stray anymore," he says. "You belong to us now, Littlefoot, and we love you." The abomination slammed into me with the force of a tsunami right as Robert looped his arms through and pressed his back to mine, and then we really were 10 years old again, a lifetime rewound. A lifetime to relive and do everything right so he and I and everyone would finally be okay. My mom would live, and we would save his dad. We had time. All I had to do was wait until the darkness passed through me and moved on, only it wasn't passing through me. It was hitting something hard, something solid, and piling up. Clinging to me, filling me, suffocating me, drowning me, and it was because of Robert. Because Robert was holding on and blocking it, keeping it inside me, keeping it from going away. Then it was done. Robert let go. When my knees gave way, he caught me and helped me to the ground. Only it wasn't Robert. It couldn't be Robert. Robert was dead. Only when I turned to look, his eyes were staring into mine. No. Not his eyes, Sadie's. What? I couldn't breathe. What was wrong with my chest? Honey, what are you doing here? Sadie's voice was shaking. It's just it's my dad. He told me you were here, and memories crashed over me. Robert's voice, broken and ragged and terrified. My dad told me to kill you. My dad told me to help you. For a wonderful second, I was light and whole and happy and above all, triumphant. Robert had broken the curse in more than one way. If he'd just held on a little longer, I could have told him. I could tell him that we all needed him, that none of us were better off without him, that we all loved him more than he could ever. Darkness drowned me then, and hate that I could never have imagined, hate that devours, hate that corrodes, hate that eats its way out to destroy. I don't know what Sadie saw in my face. I don't want to know. I just know that it made her run away. That it made Cassie send a text that said, if you ever come near my daughter again, I might actually kill you. I haven't seen either of them since. I don't think I ever will. Robert's demon hasn't escaped. The hatred is still here. Right here. I'd say I'm mainlining hatred incarnate, only you can't mainline yourself. This is what I get to be now, until I die. A jar of clay. A prison for a demon that isn't even mine. It's all Robert's fault, and I hate him for it. I hate him, more than he could have feared. More than he could ever imagine. That's what I'd say to him right now. Fuck you, Robert. You were the only thing that felt like home and you burned yourself down anyway. I hate you. I will always hate you. I hate you more than you could ever know. I hate you so fucking much, but I love you even more, and that will never stop, no lie.